Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. As before, I'm joined by my fellow members of the panel, Ms. Surya Istefan and Mr. Ali Akbar.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Now, today we're going to hear evidence from Mr. David Jones, who is on the Building Control Department of the Herefordshire County Council. And we can now meet Mr. Jones, and I'll check that he can see and hear me. Mr. Jones, good morning. Are you there?
Good morning. Yes, I am.
Ah, good. You should have on the screen in front of you the words of the affirmation, which I think you're going to make. Do you have them?
Yes, I can see them.
Good, thank you. Well, can I ask you then, please, to make the affirmation by reading out the words in front of you?
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Now, there are one or two things I need to run through with you before we start taking your evidence. First, can you confirm that you are alone in the room from which you're giving your evidence?
I am, yes.
Thank you. Can you confirm that you have no documents or other materials with you?
I can confirm that. Yes.
Thank you very much. And finally, can you confirm that your mobile phone is in another room and that you don't have any other electronic device with you which is capable of receiving messages?
I can confirm that to be the case.
Thank you very much. Now, you might like to know that your legal representatives are in the virtual hearing room. They will, as it were, look after your interests. They can, if they consider it essential, intervene in the hearing, but in general, we have other means of enabling them to contact our counsel. So I've asked them to keep their microphones and cameras switched off, but they are there. I hope we shan't have any problems with the sound or vision. If we do, we'll probably take a short break while we ask our technicians to sort them out. We shall have a short break during the morning and the afternoon. The morning break normally comes around about 11:15. But if at any stage you feel you need to have a break for other reasons, will you just indicate that and we'll do our best to accommodate you. All right. I'm going to mention this now while I'm talking about breaks. It is very important that once you've started giving your evidence, you don't discuss your evidence with anyone, nor anything relating to it until you've completely finished. I'll remind you of that when we have breaks, but if for any reason I forget to do so, can you please bear that in mind? Is there anything you'd like to raise with me or any question you'd like to ask before we start?
No, nothing. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, in that case, I'm going to invite Ms. Troop to put some questions to you. Yes, Ms. Troop.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Jones. Before I start, could you just confirm, please, that you can see and hear me clearly?
I can, yes.
Can I start then by thanking you for attending this public inquiry to give your evidence? It is very much appreciated. And just a couple of things to run through. If you have any difficulty understanding any of the questions that I ask, please just say so and I can repeat the question or try to put it again in a different way. All right? And then also, if you can try to keep your voice up, there's a transcriber on the call who's taking a note of all of the evidence. So it's important that she hears all of your answers.
Yes.
The other thing is that if you're answering yes or no, please do try not simply to nod or to shake your head for yes or no, but actually to say the words, because obviously a nod or a shake of the head doesn't show up on the transcript. All right?
All right, yes.
Mr. Jones, you've provided 2 witness statements to the inquiry, yes?
Yes, that's right.
So the first witness statement, if we can get that up on the screen, please, is at HBC 6029. If we just look at the first page, is that your witness statement?
Yes, it is.
Can we go through, please, to page 62 of that statement? Yes, and we can see there at the very bottom of the page that the statement is dated the 18th of December 2019, yes?
Yes.
And that there's a signature there. Is that your signature?
It is, yes.
And if we look now, please, at your second witness statement, which is at HBC 6051. And if we go to page 6, again, we see a signature there at the bottom. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
And we can see that that second witness statement is dated the 9th of November 2020. Yes?
Yes.
Mr. Jones, have you read both of your witness statements recently?
I have, yes.
Can you confirm that the contents of both of them are true and accurate?
Yes, to the best of my recollection, they are. Yes.
And lastly, have you discussed the content of your witness statements with anyone before coming here today?
No, I haven't. I've only discussed procedural matters with my legal representatives, but not the evidence.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to start by asking you some questions about your background and your career and some training. So if we can go first, please, to page 3 of your first witness statement, which is HBC 6029. We can see a heading there about halfway down the page, education and career history, yes?
Yes.
You tell us first there, yes, thank you, under that heading that you studied up to 1995 for a BSc in construction management, yes?
Yes, that's right.
And then going down that from 1995 to 2001, you worked at a company first called Higgs and Hill Western Limited, originally as a site manager and then as a project quantity surveyor. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
Then moving on from late 2001 until May 2003, you explained that you were self-employed. You were essentially doing freelance project management, I think. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
And then in June 2003, you joined Herefordshire Council Building Control Department.
Yes, that's right.
If we can turn over now to page 4, please. I'm summarising this first section, but I think essentially, and you must correct me if I'm wrong, between June 2003 and 2005, your role was as a building control surveyor. Thereafter, between June 2005 and November 2011, your role was a senior building control surveyor, yes?
Yes.
Can I take it that that move was a promotion?
Yes, it was.
All right. And then I think we see another promotion in November 2011 up until July 2014. And during that period, you were a building control team leader or manager, yes?
Yes.
Right. And as I understand it, again, I am summarising from this section of your witness statement, you left Herefordshire Building Control in July 2014 and went to work for another private company for a number of years. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
And I think you were a construction manager during that period.
Yes.
And in your second witness statement, we don't need to go to it at this stage, but for the record, it's at page 2, paragraph 5. You explain that in October 2020, you returned to Herefordshire Building Control as a senior project officer, yes?
No, not to Herefordshire Building Control. I returned to Herefordshire Council, but it's not a role within building control.
I see. Are you still in that role now?
Yes, I am.
In summary, what is that role? What does it involve?
Project management, it's about bringing together the resources, the people and the finance to make council projects become a reality, to achieve the objectives of the council, which may be construction related but may not. It's any project that has a defined end objective.
I understand. So not a building control role at all?
Not at all, no.
I understand. All right, if we can go back now, please, to your first witness statement, HBC 6029, and to page 5. I'm just going to explore with you a little about the training you received in the early part of your career. Yes, thank you. You've been asked by the inquiry at the top of that page about training you'd undertaken before 2013 in relation to various matters, and specifically you were asked about training you'd received in relation to the requirements of the building regulations and associated guidance on fire safety, the requirements for the use of combustible materials over 18 meters, and any training on fire testing. If we look at your answer, and if we can move to the second, that's the second paragraph, but it begins in early 2004. You explain there, and again, I am summarizing, so you must correct me if I have it wrong, that you attended in early 2004 a 4-day training course on the building regulations. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And I think you say that that training was designed for those individuals who were completely new to the building control profession, was it?
Yes, yes, it was.
You say, I think it's 4 lines up from the bottom of that first paragraph, beginning in early 2004, that during that training you were given an overview of the requirements, 13 at the time, in early 2004, in A to N, and all of the associated approved documents. Yes?
Yes, yes.
As far as you can remember, Mr. Jones, was any particular priority or focus given to any one of the approved documents, or was it an overview of all of them in more general terms?
It was an overview of all of them in very general terms. I think in terms of the time spent on each, the larger approved documents would have justified more time than some of the simpler ones, but it was a very high level overview of the approved documents in the time that was available.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. And part of that obviously will have included approved document B as it stood at the time.
Yes.
You've explained very helpfully that the course itself was quite high level in terms of giving an overview of all of those approved documents. Did you at any stage, as part of that training, read approved document B? Can you remember?
I can't recall the detail of the course, but from memory, yes, we would have had approved document B open during the training, so that we could follow the program of training that was being delivered.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Did you come to understand at that stage, insofar as fire was concerned, that the primary function of the building regulations and the guidance in approved document B was to protect life?
Yes.
You did. And other than that, talking more generally about your training in the early part of your career, other than that 4-day training course, which we've just discussed, I think you refer also to a later course on BS 9999, the Code of Practice for Fire Safety in the Design, Management and Use of Buildings. That's at paragraph 3 on page 5 of your witness statement. We don't need to go to it. And I think you say there that the focus of that training was mostly on means of escape, was it?
Yes, I seem to remember that BS 9999 was new at that time, and the most significant thing about it in terms of what had gone before was a different approach to means of escape, and so that's what the training focused on.
Yes, I see. Other than that, you tell us that your other learning was on-the-job learning with support from more senior colleagues and other members of the team at Hereford. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Can we go back now, please, to your first witness statement and to page 5? I just want to look at a particular section of that with you. If we can go, please, yes, to the penultimate paragraph on that page. It starts halfway through the 3rd line, beginning, "I had no training." Do you see that?
Yes.
You say there, "I had no training specific to the use of materials in buildings over 18 meters, or in the testing and certification of building products and materials. Please note that there were no buildings with stories over 18 meters in Herefordshire. for me to gain any on-the-job training in areas of design relevant to such buildings. Yes?
Yes.
Just to ensure that I am clear, what is the period that you're talking about there? Do you mean up to 2013?
The question relates to the time up to 2013, but actually it would be throughout my career. I've never worked on buildings over 18 metres in any role.
Yes, and that's essentially because of geography, that there were and are still no high-rise buildings in Herefordshire, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Thank you. I want to move on now, please, to Kingspan and to the approval certificate that was issued by the LABC for Kingspan's K15 product in May 2009. And we're going to look in some detail at your role in that, all right?
Okay.
I'm going to start with how this work came to you in the first place. I think it's right that it came to you through your line manager at the time, Chris Jenner at Hereford, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Right. And as far as you understood it, was it the case that your line manager, Chris Jenner, by the time the matter came to you, had already been in touch with the LABC about a proposed approval certificate for K15?
Yes, from emails that I've seen since, that does seem to be the case, yes.
All right, let's go to one of those so that I can help you with that. The first one, please, is at HBC 6049. Yes, if you look at the top email there, I think this might have been what you were referring to. We can see an email from Phil Harrison to Chris Jenner sent on the 26th of November 2008 at 10:14. Do you see it?
Yes.
Phil Harrison worked at the LABC at the time, yes?
Yes, he did.
And we can see from that email, if you look at his sign-off, that his title was Business Development Director, yes?
Yes.
So looking at the email, Phil Harrison says there, "Good morning, Chris. Thank you for agreeing to take on this system approval for Kingspan." Just pausing there, if we look back to the subject line of the email, at the top, we can see that it says forward LABC system approval for a walling detail incorporating Cooltherm K15. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can we agree, therefore, that it seems clear that the system approval Phil Harrison is referring to in this email is the one for K15?
Yes.
Thank you. If you go on to where I had read to in the same email, Mr. Harrison goes on, as you've probably already noticed, Andrew Pack's contact details are at the foot of this string of emails. And then he says, attached as agreed for ease of reference is a PDF of the type approval service manual, together with a copy of the certification flowchart. Yes?
Yes.
That first document, the type approval service manual, is one which we will come back to at a later stage. For now, is it the case that at some stage after this email on the 26th of November 2008, your line manager, Mr. Jenner, allocated the work of researching and carrying out this assessment to you?
Yes, that's right.
Can you remember how that came about? Was it through a conversation?
I can't recall the detail. I haven't seen any emails
No.
to that effect, so I suspect it was verbal.
Yes, all right. I want to take you back now, please, to your first witness statement, HBC 6029, and to page 7. If we look, please, at the third paragraph, beginning, "It is my understanding." Do you have that?
Yes.
I'm just going to read that with you. You say there, "It is my understanding that Herefordshire Council was selected by LABC not for reasons of any particular technical expertise," and then in brackets, a Herefordshire Council exercise in the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower fire confirmed that there are no buildings in Herefordshire with stories over 18 metres, and there was no specific relevant expertise within the Herefordshire Council building control team at that time. And then you go on, but because of its proximity to Kingspan's Pembridge offices. Yes?
Yes.
So just pausing there, in terms of the exercise that you explain was conducted after the Grenfell Tower fire, and the confirmation that at the time, so retrospectively, there was no specific relevant expertise within the Herefordshire Council building control team. As far as you are aware, is that a matter, the technical expertise of the team, to which any thought was given at the time in late 2008?
Yes, it was discussed. I recall that when the work was first delegated to me, I was reticent about taking it on because although I didn't know a lot about the product at that stage, I could see that it was to do with material testing and certification, and I knew that that was not within my scope, and that there was nobody else within Herefordshire Council who had any more experience in that area. And as I remember, Chris Jenner sort of listened to that and suggested I call LABC and discuss what they want and see if what they were asking for was within our capabilities or not. So there was some thought given to it, yes.
Yes, I see. So do I understand correctly from the answer you've just given that you did express your reticence to your own line manager, Chris Jenner?
Yes.
And that as a result, he made the suggestion that you call someone at the LABC to discuss it in more detail?
Yes, yes.
Right. If we can go back, please, to your witness statement at page 7, going on to the 4th paragraph, you say, this is the one starting, I believe. Do you see it?
Yes.
Thank you. I believe the work was delegated to me because at that time I had a specific role in the team for marketing activity, and the type approval system was viewed very much as a marketing tool to raise the profile of the LABC brand. There was a potential marketing benefit in this for Herefordshire Council through its association with the LABC brand. Yes?
Yes.
When you say there in the second line that it was viewed very much as a marketing tool, forgive me, who had that view? Just so that I'm clear, do you mean the LABC?
I think it was my view, but in my experience, at least, it was the view of other building control surveyors. That's how we viewed the type approval system. A certain amount of the activity within the type approval system seemed to me to be mirroring perhaps what companies like the NHBC were offering on a nationwide basis. And so the activity of LABC was almost a marketing activity to try and counter that competition by offering a similar service.
Yes, I see. So thinking about that paragraph that we've just read, you believe, do you, that you were essentially picked because of your role in the team in marketing rather than for any technical knowledge or expertise?
I think that's how it would have begun, because I did have a specific role for marketing, and this fell into the marketing category on the face of it.
Yes.
It would have been the case that I would have been as experienced in building control generally as anybody in the Herefordshire building control team at that time, and perhaps more experienced than most.
Yes, I see. If we can go back, please, to your witness statement, the first witness statement, and to page 19. Just thinking further about this issue and about your understanding of the purpose of an LABC system or type approval. If we can go, please, to your answer, it's just under halfway down the page, under question 29, starting I understood. Do you see that?
Yes.
We look at that together. You say, I understood it to be primarily a marketing tool Many product manufacturers like having their product associated with and endorsed by the LABC brand. It can also be said that an LABC system approval certificate can assist in the product's processing through building regulations approval, which again can be used by manufacturers as a marketing benefit. And then you go on to refer to some of Kingspan's marketing literature, which we might come to a little later. Can you just help me? I mean, you may have answered this, but just in the event that you have any further detail, how had you come to understand this process of approval to be primarily a marketing tool?
Because as a local authority building control service, most of our activity with LABC was for marketing purposes. LABC were primarily handling marketing activity that benefited us as a local authority council. They were also involved in coordinating training for regional building control groups, but primarily LABC was a marketing organisation for us. And so my feeling would have been that anything that came to us from LABC would be most likely to be marketing related.
Yes, thank you. So is it correct for me to say that in a way, and you must tell me if I'm not correct, this approval process in terms of marketing served to benefit everyone? Kingspan would benefit through their association with the LABC brand. The LABC brand would have its profile raised through being promoted as part of Kingspan's marketing literature. And in turn, Herefordshire would benefit through its association with LABC. Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say, yes. Yes.
What about the reader? It may seem a ridiculous question, but do you think the reader of any approval certificate would have understood those certificates primarily as a marketing tool?
I think that there would have been some understanding that was the case. The LABC type and system approval certificates were not particularly in depth, and I think that would have been appreciated by most people reading them. Certainly, if I speak as a building control officer, in instances where I came across an LABC type approval certificate for something I was dealing with as part of a building regulations approval, I found them to be of very limited value because there are so many project-specific issues that you're needing to consider that the scant information that is in an LABC certificate is of limited value to in technical terms. So I think there would have been a general understanding that it was as much about marketing as anything else, but that's just my opinion.
Yes, that's very helpful. So in terms of what you've expressed about finding LABC certificates to be of limited value and not very in-depth, as far as you were aware, thinking about 2009, let's take, is that a view that was shared by others in the building control profession?
I'm not sure I can answer that, but I believe yes. I don't believe it was a view that was unique to me.
No. Is it something that you remember being discussed amongst colleagues, for example?
Yes, I believe I do. Yes.
Do you think it is right that non-building control professionals, so for example, architects, contractors, builders, would have relied on the terms of LABC approval certificates as independent certification of a product and its compliance or otherwise with the building regulations?
No, I don't believe so. I always viewed the LABC certificates to be more for the benefit of the building control body that was processing an approval as background information to the work they were doing, rather than something for the designer to rely upon.
I see. How did you come to that understanding that they were more for building control than for a designer or an architect to rely on?
I think it was just I felt it was a common understanding at the time that but they were aimed more at the building control bodies.
Yes. I just wonder, and it may be that you're not able to answer, if a designer or architect did happen to be reading an LABC approval certificate, would you agree with me that it may not be clear to them that that certificate was designed primarily as a marketing tool? They may take it to be an independent certification of a product's compliance or otherwise with the building regulations.
Yes, I can see that that would be the case, but that in any live project, the design would ultimately have to go through all the project-specific approvals with building controls. So anything that the designer was relying upon in the certificate would later be vetted by a building control body as part of the approval.
Yes, I see. That's at the very end of a project, isn't it? So did you see, given your view of the value of LABC approval certificates, did you see any danger for designers and architects in the long period leading up to sign off by building control on a project if they were relying on the terms of an LABC certificate?
I would say that anything they relied on in the certificate would be vetted not on completion, but during the design approval stage at the beginning of, pre-construction, not at the end of a project. So yes, any issues should come out of that stage, not at completion.
Yes, I see. Despite, or even if it was your view that LABC type approval certificates were of limited value and perhaps were not terribly in depth, would you agree, or do you agree, that it would be of the utmost importance that the technical content of any such certificate was clear and accurate?
Speaking from where we are now, looking back, I agree that yes, it should be done properly or not at all.
Well, forgive me, did you have a different, you said speaking from where we are now looking back, did you ever have a different view as to the importance of the content being clear and accurate? No, I would have felt then that it needed to be as accurate as it could be within the scope of the certificate being done. It was not a, it was a very limited exercise. But as far as that exercise went, I would have wanted it to be accurate. Yes, I wouldn't have been lax about that. Thank you. Can we turn now to some correspondence? Again, this is from the early stage of your involvement in the certification for K15. If we can go, please, to KIN 3024985. Yes, thank you. And if you look first, please, Mr. Jones, at the second email in the chain, the one sent by Chris Jenner to Andrew Pack on the 26th of November 2008. We can see, do you see it?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. We can see that Mr. Jenner says there, "Hello, Andrew. We at Herefordshire Council Building Control will be pleased to work with you on your proposed system approval application. David Jones will be your dedicated contact in relation to this application and will contact you in the near future to discuss the product and process of achieving approval." And then he says, "However, please feel free to contact me anytime to discuss this or other related matters." That is your introduction to and first contact with Andrew Pack, I think, is it?
Yes, I believe it was.
So if we go up to Mr. Pack's response at the top email in the chain, we can see that he responds on the same day, and yes, on the same day to both you and Chris Jenner. And in the last line of his email, he asks you to arrange a meeting to discuss the matter, yes?
Yes.
Right. We're going to come on to that meeting shortly in quite some detail. But before we do that, I want to ask you a little more about your understanding at that time, so before you went to a meeting with Kingspan, about the approval process itself and what it would involve. You've explained already that having expressed your reticence about this particular project to Chris Jenner, he suggested to you that you make a call to the LABC, yes?
Yes.
And if we can look, in fact, please, at your first witness statement at page 14. Yes, and at the top of the page, under the first underlined section, so under the question, you say this: at the outset of the 2009 K15 approval, I knew nothing about the type system approval process, having not been involved in it previously. The first thing I did was to call our contact at LABC for an explanation of how the process worked, what my part in it should be, and how I should go about doing it. And then you go on. The first thing I was told was that the procedures were in need of tidying up and that the terminology was not really appropriate. And then in brackets, the term type dated back to the system approval of house types for house builders, while the term system was being used for products rather than systems for want of another name. Yes?
Yes, that's how I recall the conversation. Yes.
Just pausing there, can you help us as to when this call took place? So was it before or after you met with representatives from Kingspan about K15?
I believe it would have been before, because I would have tried to find out about, well, firstly, I had to establish whether I was actually going to carry on and do this work. But in the event that I did, I needed to find out more about what was involved. So I believe it would have been before the meeting with Kingspan.
Thank you. Can I take it from what you've just said that you actually took the decision as to whether or not to take on this work during or just after, but as a result of your call with your contact at the LABC? So prior to that call to the LABC, you were still deciding whether or not you would accept this piece of work, essentially.
Yes, prior to that call, I think I was veering towards declining and saying, I don't think we are the right people for this. It was that call, I think, that where I was persuaded that, yes, given the scope of what's required, you can do this.
Yes, I see. If you had decided, Mr. Jones, that, or if you had not been persuaded by that call with the LABC, and if you had decided to decline the piece of work, would that have been easy for you to do? Would it have caused any difficulties with your own line manager, or would you have been perfectly comfortable to decline it?
I had a good relationship with my line manager. I could speak frankly with him, but I was a conscientious employee. I'd been asked by my manager to do something, so I think there would have been a drive internally to try and do what was being asked of me. It wouldn't have come naturally to me to just throw it back and say I'm not doing this. So there would have been a conflict there. There would have been a pressure to try and find a way that yes, I can do this if I believed that I could.
Yes, but an internal or personal pressure because of your own work ethic, essentially, yes?
Yes, yes.
Just thinking about the meeting with Kingspan, if it does help, I think it might help to date it. If we can go, please, to KIN 3024987, and this, Mr. Jones, is really just to help you to set the timeline in context. This is quite a long series of emails between you and Mr. Pack on the 26th and 27th of November 2008, once you've been introduced to him. And I don't think we need to go through them all, because if we look to the top email, we can see there that it appears that a meeting date has been settled between you for Friday the 5th of December at 2 p.m. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Would that date accord with your recollection of when the meeting with Kingspan took place?
That would sound right to me, yes.
And you think that the call you had with your contact at the LABC came before that meeting on the 5th of December 2008?
I believe so, yes.
While we're on this email, Could you just take a look, please, at the second email in the chain, which is sent by you to Mr. Pack at 10:02 on the 27th of November? Do you see that?
Yes.
In the last sentence of your email, you say this: I haven't been onto the Kingspan site in a while. Should I just come to the main reception? Had you been to Kingspan's site at Pembridge previously?
I had just once, I believe. I seem to remember they had some outline proposals at one time to extend one of their warehouses, and I was asked to come out and do a site visit to see what the potential for that would be in terms of the building regulations.
I see. If we can go back now to think about the call that you made to the LABC, in terms of who that was, I think you tell us in your first witness statement, and we don't need to go to it, but I think you tell us there that you cannot recall who it was at the LABC that you spoke with.
No, I can't.
And is that still the case now?
It's still the case. Having seen the emails which show that it was, I believe, Phil Harrison that made the first contact with Chris Jenner,
Yes.
I think it's likely that I would have picked up the phone to Philip Harrison, but whether he took the call, whether somebody else fielded the call, or whether he passed me on to somebody else, I can't say. I can't recall.
All right, that's helpful. That was going to be the next question. In terms of your involvement, in the period prior to the 5th of December, I think the only person from the LABC with whom you had written contact was Phil Harrison, wasn't it?
Yes, that seems to be the case.
All right. Can we go back now, please, again to your first witness statement and to page 15? Yes, and if we look to the section under question 19, so beginning, I cannot really answer. Do you see that?
Yes.
I just want to read that with you. You say that you've been asked what assessment of the product or system was normally or should be carried out. And your answer is this: I cannot really answer for what would have been normal, as this was the first time I had been involved in an approval, but I did seek advice in the initial contact with LABC as to what level of assessment was expected and how it should be approached. And then going on, you say, I was told that the assessment should not be particularly in-depth and should consist of an initial meeting with the client, followed by a review of manufacturer's details and any third-party certification to assess the product attributes and the way it could be used. Where the third-party guidance is deemed reliable, there would be no need to dig any deeper, and the statements therein could be accepted at face value. Is that right?
That was certainly my recollection, because it was quite significant in terms of the decision to agree to take on that work in the end. I knew enough about sort of the testing and certification of products that I knew there would be an awful lot of test reports and testing standards involved, and I knew that was not within my expertise. So being told that actually the key thing is this product has a BBA certificate, the BBA have already done all that checking and vetting of all the test information, and you can use that information. That was quite important to me. It was quite significant that actually I was able to use a BBA certificate and not have to verify the information that was within it.
Yes, I see. So is it your recollection that your contact at the LABC during that call specifically mentioned the existence of a BBA certificate for the product?
Yes, I do recall, but that was quite important. Yes.
Yes. And when you say that it was significant, do I understand correctly that it was significant that this was mentioned because it provided you with some reassurance that you were not going to be required to go deep into areas of complex testing and standards which were not within your expertise?
That's right, yes.
Can we go back, please, to the paragraph we've just looked at in your witness statement on page 15? If we look, please, at the second paragraph, starting "I was told," that we've just read, and at the end there you say, "where the third-party guidance is deemed reliable," and I think this is what you were told during the call. Just so that I'm clear, as far as you understood it, who was to decide whether or not third-party guidance was reliable? Was that for you to decide, or the LABC?
I believe it was guidance given by the LABC that a UCAS accredited certification body could be deemed reliable, and that mirrored industry practice, really. That there were certain certification bodies, the BBA being the key one, that across the industry were viewed with this level of trust, that actually you could take the content of a BBA certificate and trust that it was reliable.
Yes. In terms of those certification bodies and the view across the industry or industry practice in terms of reliance and levels of trust, you said in that answer that the BBA were the key organisation. What were the others at that time, as far as you are aware, Mr. Jones, who were viewed, or whose certificates were viewed with that degree of trust?
I believe there was reference in the LABC guidance to UCAS accredited certification bodies. I couldn't tell you what others there were. The BBA was the one we came across almost universally in that context.
Yes, and I think the reference to UCAS accredited organisations comes in the LABC manual, which we will come on to that. We will come on to that a little later. As far as you are aware, and you may have answered this, were there any third-party certification bodies or organisations in 2009 whose certificates or guidance would not be deemed reliable? Or would that depend on whether or not they were UCAS accredited?
I think it would depend on whether they were UCAS accredited. I can't recall any that I would have said were not reliable, but I can't recall any alternatives at this time.
No. Yes, can we go please back to your first witness statement and this time to page 34, please? If we go to the first paragraph that is not italicized, beginning these statements. Thank you. You're talking here about a presumption of compliance, or the degree of trust that you've just described to us that was placed in the content of BBA certificates. And you say there, these statements are consistent with the brief I was given in 2009 by the LABC. And if there were doubts about the content of the BBA certificate, it would have been for LABC as the scheme administrator to question this, yes?
Yes.
You then go on, this is really what you've just described, to say, this view of the status of BBA certification as a trusted source of reliable information was consistent with the way they were viewed in the wider building control profession, not just in type approvals. Is that right?
Yes, that was my experience.
I want to ask about, my understanding is that during your call with the LABC, and against the background that you understood the BBA to be a trusted and reliable source, and that was the general view, during your call with the LABC, you've told us that assertions made within a BBA certificate, you were to take at face value, yes?
That was my recollection, yes.
I just want to ask about that practice, or your understanding of that. Was there not a risk, if you were to take that approach, in just accepting at face value statements within another third-party certificate that an error could end up being perpetuated. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it does make sense, and yes, it is a risk when one certificate is based on another. Anything inaccurate in the first certificate will naturally be reflected in the second one.
Yes, because if every third-party certification organisation took that approach, one early error could end up being perpetuated on and on and on and on, couldn't it? It becomes
Yes.
a bit of a house of cards, possibly.
Yes.
Do you think that's fair?
I think that's fair to say, yes.
Yes. Is that a risk to which you gave consideration at the time of your call with the LABC or afterwards at any stage?
I had no reason at that time to doubt what was in the BBA certificate, and I'd been told that this really is what you should base your assessment on. So I don't think I fully considered that risk at that time. I think I accepted the logic that the information I put forward could be based on the BBA certificate. I remember questioning both with LABC and with Kingspan, but actually, what is the point of this? If all I'm doing is taking a BBA certificate and reformatting it, if you like, representing that information, which is essentially what the brief was about, what's the point of it? What's it going to achieve? If they've already got a BBA certificate, surely that gives Kingspan everything they need. But I didn't consider, I wouldn't have expected there to be a risk of grave errors in the BBA certificate then. It just wasn't how we viewed the BBA at that time.
No, I appreciate that it's your evidence that you had no particular reason to doubt the content, any of the technical content of the BBA certificate. I suppose, really out of interest and given your profession, what I'm trying to understand is whether, in terms of the wider risk of the practice of simply repeating assertions made within one third-party certificate in another, in 2008 and 2009, did you give consideration to that wider risk that an error, not necessarily in the BBA certificate for K15 you were dealing with, but an error could end up being perpetuated endlessly?
I imagine I would have given some consideration to it. I can't recall in what way, but certainly as part of the process, I sent my report off to LABC, who I understood were going to get it checked and verified through their network, and I sent it to Kingspan for an accuracy check. So clearly, in my mind, it was something that, even though in my mind I was only representing information that had already been established by the BBA, I did clearly feel it needed another level of checking. So I didn't just put it forward and say that because it's from the BBA it must be right. I think I put it forward to say this is based on the BBA certificate, but please review it and see if you agree that it is accurate. So I suppose that's the only context in which I questioned what I was doing in that respect.
Yes. Thank you. Just going back to something you said a short while ago, that you questioned both with the LABC and Kingspan, what is the point of this? If I'm just essentially replicating what is already in a BBA certificate, what's the point of doing it at all? Is that fair? Is that what you were asking?
That was one of my early questions, yes. Yeah.
Because in a way, and you must tell me if I'm wrong, the impression I have is that you understood yourself to be being asked to do a bit of a cut and paste job. Is that fair?
Yes, I think that probably does describe it. I was to go and meet with Kingspan, take the information they gave me verbally, take the BBA certificate, extract the information, filter out the parts of it that didn't relate to the building regulations, and just represent it in a format that sort of matched the building regulations A to P.
Yes.
I was representing information. Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry I spoke over you. And so, am I right to say that it was that understanding that reassured you enough to accept the job?
Yes, that was a key part of it. It was when I say in one of my written responses that I was told it was not to be a particularly in-depth assessment. That's what I meant really, that actually I was only taking this information and representing it. I did not need to dig beyond it to verify that information. And that was very important to me in terms of, well, can I actually do this or not?
Yes. When you say that you raised this is one of the first questions you asked in your call with your contact at the LABC. And Mr. Jones, when you asked that question, what is actually the point of this? What was the response? Can you remember?
From LABC, I can't recall in detail, but I think, to the best of my recollection, what they said was, we'll go and speak to Kingspan and find out from them what they want to achieve from it. What's the point of it for them? Because they're the ones paying for this service.
Yes.
Paying LABC.
And then, as I understand it from your previous answer, you did ask Kingspan at your meeting, what is the point of this?
Yes, yes.
Can you remember what the answer? We're going to come, I'm afraid, back to that meeting in some detail, but just on this point, can you remember what the answer was to that question during your meeting with Kingspan?
My recollection is that they were very keen to be associated with the LABC brand. They said, we like working with LABC. We'd like to be able to put the LABC brand on our marketing. We'd like it associated with our product. So again, it links back to this marketing aspect of the process.
Yes. All right, thank you. In fact, I think if we can go back, please, to your first witness statement and to page 19. If we look, please, just under halfway down the page, under question 29, yes, you say there, halfway through the first line, many product manufacturers like having their product associated with and endorsed by the LABC brand. That's essentially what you've just explained. That was Kingspan's, well, that was your impression of Kingspan's view, was it, during your meeting?
Yes, in terms of the question of what is the point of this when you already have a BBA certificate, yes. Yes.
And then at the next sentence, you say, it can also be said, I'm sorry, we've already looked at this section, but to go back to it, it can also be said that an LABC system approval certificate can assist in the product's processing through building regulations approval. Yes?
Yes.
As far as you can recollect, were the Kingspan representatives at your meeting on the 5th of December aware of that aspect of having an LABC approval certificate, that it could make the passage through building control easier?
Oh, I believe they were, yes.
Do you remember that actually being discussed?
I can't remember the detail of the discussion, but I find it hard to believe in introducing the system approval to them. I find it hard to believe that wasn't discussed.
So do you think that you explained that to them in introducing the system approval process at the meeting?
I think I would have, yes.
Right, thank you. Can we go now, I'm sorry, back to your first witness statement again, and this time to page 15. I want to come back to a couple of other matters in relation to your initial call to the LABC before you decided to accept this piece of work. At the final paragraph of this page, beginning one of the first, do you see that?
Yes.
You say that one of the first questions I had for LABC was how I could go about considering background information to system approval when K15 was just one element of a rain screen cladding system. As far as I recall, this was something I was told not to worry about that, and that I was just to describe the product, explore what systems it might be part of, and assess it on the assumption that all other parts of the system complied with the relevant guidance in their own right. Is that correct?
That's as I remember it, yes. And I think this possibly links back to an earlier part of that conversation where they talked about the terminology being wrong, that actually it's system approval, but we'd like to call it something else. But for the moment, we're stuck with this because it's what we've got. But yes, I think I was told, don't worry about the tag system approval. You'll just, just look at what you've got in front of you.
Yes. Had that been a worry for you?
Yes, I think before I went to meet, or before I did anything with this, I seem to remember I looked up the product probably on the Kingspan website, and I seem to remember my first impression looking at the diagrams was that perhaps Kingspan made an entire system. Perhaps they made a cladding product and a system of cavity barriers. But as I got deeper into it, I could see that the only product that was defined was the K15. So I wrangled with this quite a lot. How can I do a system approval? I don't know what the system is.
Yes.
And of course, as a building control officer, I was looking at this perhaps as I would a building regulations approval for a live project where I can't approve things without knowing what they are.
Yes.
So this was a difficult one for me at that stage, yes.
I understand. And when the person you were speaking with at LABC told you not to worry about that, did that completely satisfy your concerns about this aspect of this particular approval?
I wouldn't say it completely satisfied my concerns, but of course I was going to this meeting with Kingspan some days later, and so I suppose it satisfied my concerns enough at that stage to go on to the meeting with Kingspan and find out more about how it might work.
Can we go back now, please, to page 27 of your first witness statement? If we can go to the third paragraph, or the second non-underlined paragraph, please, which starts, I sought advice. Do you have that?
Yes.
I'm going to read that. You say there, I sought advice, and I'm so sorry, I should have put it in context. We can see from the paragraph above that this is about advice you were seeking from the LABC, so prior to the meeting with Kingspan. You say there, I sought advice mainly on A, the procedure for type approvals and Herefordshire Council's part in it, B, how they thought I should go about the assessment, C, how in depth the assessment should be given my level of experience, D, how it was possible to undertake a system approval when only one part of the system, K15, is known, and E, what the point of a system approval would be for a product which already has BBA certification. Yes?
Yes.
So I think we've covered now together a number of those. I just want to ask you about this. Looking at C, how in depth the assessment should be given my level of experience, do you mean there that you told your contact at the LABC about your level of experience with type approvals and in terms of this product? Were you clear about that, about your own lack of experience? I
believe I would have been, yes. I started this conversation angling towards not doing this work, towards declining it, and I've no doubt that I would have been clear on why. I didn't have any experience in the testing and certification of materials. I didn't have working knowledge of test standards, and I believe I would have explained that to them in giving my reasons why I don't think we can do this for you.
Oh, I see. So you were perfectly open with the LABC contact about the fact that you were hesitating as to whether or not to take on the work.
Yes, I believe I was, because at the start of the conversation, I think that's how I was thinking.
Yes. And what was that person's reaction to that and to the information you gave about your own lack of experience in that particular area?
I just remember this BBA certificate being the key factor, that no, it's okay, don't worry, it's got a BBA certificate. And that was it, that was the answer, really.
Yes, I see. So as far as you can recollect, is it fair for me to say that whoever it was that you were speaking with at the LABC did not express any concern about your level of experience?
No, not that I recall. And I think I would have been clear. And LABC themselves, we worked with LABC, as I say, in marketing and training terms. So I think the LABC contact would have had a good idea of what our capabilities at Herefordshire Council would be from those previous activities.
Yes, I see. You were not unknown to one another.
No, no.
I understand. I'm going to move on now. We're going to start to look at the meeting with Kingspan, which we think took place on the 5th of December 2008, all right?
Right.
Prior to the meeting, I think you said that you might have looked at Kingspan's own website to look at the K15 product, is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And we also know that you had your initial call with your LABC contact.
Yes.
Before the meeting with Kingspan, was there anything else that you did to prepare for that meeting or to gain some more knowledge about what you were going into?
Not that I can remember. I think that meeting with Kingspan was intended to be an enlightening experience, if you like. That was part, much the reason for the meeting was to find out more about the product.
Yes.
And what Kingspan wanted to achieve.
Yes. So when you say that you were going to be enlightened at the meeting, is this right? Just so that I'm clear, you were looking to hear more about their product, obviously, from Kingspan, and as to what their aims were in seeking LABC approval at all. Is that right? Yes,
that's right.
Right. If we can go to your first witness statement again, please, and to page 9. If we look at it's the penultimate paragraph actually, starting to the best. Do you see that?
Yes.
We look at that, you say there, to the best of my recollection, Andrew Pack led that meeting for Kingspan, and I recall there being at least one other person from Kingspan in attendance, but I cannot remember names without having any contemporary records to refer to. There was nobody in attendance from LABC, yes?
Yes.
Philip Heath of Kingspan has confirmed that he was present at the meeting. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, it does.
Looking in that same paragraph, you say in the top line that Andrew Pack led that meeting for Kingspan. I want to ask you about that because Mr. Pack was asked about this in his evidence to the inquiry. I don't want to take you to it, but for the record, this was at day 86, page 128, lines 23 to 25. And his evidence was that he would not say that he led the meeting. He also talked a little in the same section of the transcript about having been the person who met you at reception, and said that he could not remember who, between him and his colleague Philip Heath, did most of the talking. So just to get your recollection, when you say there that Andrew Pack led the meeting, can you help us more specifically as to what you mean by that?
Yes, when I say he led the meeting, he set the meeting up, he met me at reception, he took me to the meeting room, made the introductions and sort of started the meeting off. So he did everything that you might expect the chair of a meeting to do. I would say that once we were sat around the table, the three of us, it would have been probably much more informal. It wasn't a structured meeting as such. So during that discussion, I think Andrew and Philip Heath could have spoken equally. I wouldn't say, I couldn't say for certain that Andrew did more talking than Philip or vice versa. I think it was a very informal round the table discussion at that stage.
Yes, I see. How long did the meeting go on for? Can you recollect?
I don't recall. No, I can get some indication from the fact that the meeting appears to have been at 2 p.m.
Yes.
But
on a Friday.
Yes, but perhaps it was a couple of hours, but I'm only speculating there.
Yes, all right, thank you. I think if we can just pause there for a moment, Mr. Jones. Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the time and I realise it's a little early in the
Yes.
morning, but I've come to a good place for us to take a break if you thought that appropriate.
Well, it would be better to break now, wouldn't it, a bit early, rather than break up a line of questioning. All right. Well, I said we'd have a break about 11:15, Mr. Jones. It's a bit early, but we'll take it now anyway. So we'll come back, please, at 11:25. And I'd ask you, please, not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while we're on the break. All right. We'll see you a bit later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. We're now going back to Mr. Jones to continue taking his evidence. Mr. Jones, welcome back. Are you there? Can you see me and can you hear me?
I can see you. My screen has gone off full screen for some reason.
Right. Well, if you go to the top right-hand corner, there should be a button that says View.
There we are. Yes, that's fine.
I'm afraid you have to reset that every time we have a break. Otherwise, all right?
Yes, thank you.
And ready to carry on, are you? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Troop, when you're ready then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones, we're going to go back to the meeting you had with Kingspan, and we'll be on that for a little while. If we can go back to your first witness statement, please, and to page 9. Yes, at the very end of that page, in the final line, you say this: from memory, the main themes of that meeting were, and then going over the page, please. The Kingspan representatives gave an overview of the product and its properties and how, where it was intended to be used. In particular, the technical representatives were enthusiastic about the fire testing that Kingspan had commissioned for K15 and the fact that it had been shown to be suitable for use in buildings with stories over 18 meters. Just stopping there, please, and taking that information step by step. Can you remember what either Philip Heath or Andrew Pack said to you in terms of their overview of the product?
It's purely from memory, and it is difficult 12 years later, but
yes,
my impression of it was that it quite closely mirrored what was in their technical literature in terms of, you know, where this product should and could be used and what it was used for.
Yes. So just so that I'm clear, did you have their technical literature before you arrived at the meeting?
I know I'd seen it before the meeting, and as I said before, I'm fairly sure I looked the product up, you know, when this first came to me from Chris Channer.
Yes.
My best recollection is that they also handed me copies of the technical literature and the BBA certificate on the day. But I believe, have seen whatever was on their website ahead of that meeting.
Yes. And your recollection in general terms is that what they told you in terms of an overview of the product accorded with what is said about the product in their marketing literature, which you had seen previously, yes?
Yes. Yes.
All right. We are going to come on to that literature. For now, still looking at the paragraph in your witness statement that we've just read, when you say in the third line that the Kingspan or the technical representatives were enthusiastic about the fire testing for the product, are you able to be more specific? What was it that denoted enthusiasm to you?
I think from memory, it was just their demeanor when talking about that aspect of it. You know, this was something quite significant about the product, and not a new thing. You know, I want to be clear that, as far as I was being told at the time, this product was being marketed for buildings over 18 meters and had been for some time. So it wasn't a new thing, but it was significant to them. And of course, the BBA certificate was the most recent development that allowed them to be perhaps a little more enthusiastic about it.
Did they tell you during the meeting, as far as you can remember, what you've just explained, that this wasn't new and that K15 had been being marketed for over 18-meter use for some time?
I recall being aware of that at that meeting, yes.
I see. And did they make you aware at the meeting that the BBA certificate had been fairly recently issued? Or was that something you already knew?
I think I already knew that at that stage, but I think it's quite likely that they talked about it. Obviously, it was one of the documents they gave me, and I think they would have handed it to me as, here's our new BBA certificate.
Yes. Mr. Jones, am I correct in thinking that there were two documents handed to you during the meeting? the BBA certificate, which we will come on to, and the product or marketing literature for K15?
Yes.
Were there any others handed to you at that time?
No.
Again, I'm afraid we'll need your witness statement back up, please, and to page 10. Going back, please, to the paragraph I had just read to you. In the third line, so we've discussed the enthusiasm and how you formed that impression. And you then use the words, in terms of their enthusiasm, about the fire testing that Kingspan had commissioned for K15. Just so that I am clear, was that a reference, as you understood it at the time, fire testing that Kingspan had commissioned, to tests that had already taken place, or to tests that they had commissioned and were coming up in the future?
My understanding would have been tests that had already been taken place and were described in the BBA certificate.
I see. Do you remember what those tests were as they were described to you in the meeting?
I can't recall what they said about them in the meeting. I believe I was referred to the BBA certificate where the tests were listed and described. Certainly, I believe the BR 135 test or the test that led to that would have been discussed, because that was a key part of what they were presenting to me. Yeah. I can't recall detail about what they said about those tests.
No, all right. I want to just take you to some of Kingspan's evidence about what you've said here about their enthusiasm about fire testing, and to ask you about it. If we can go, please, to the transcript at day 86, page 122, and to line 23. Yes, if you look, do you see at line 22, this, I'm so sorry, so that, yes, this is the evidence of Andrew Pack, and he had been asked whether, essentially the section of your statement that you and I have just read was read to Mr. Pack, and he was asked whether he remembered that. That's at line 22. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And his answer was this: I don't remember being enthusiastic, no. And I then said to him, do you think he is wrong about that? He being a reference to you. And Mr. Pack's answer, which will go over the page, was, all I can recall is that we had brought along to the meeting a copy of our K15 product literature, and we brought along with us our BBA certificate. We brought no fire testing data into the meeting. And then he goes on, so I couldn't have been very enthusiastic about fire testing data if I had nothing in front of me. That was his answer. Can I take it from what you have said that you would say that he is not right about that?
About being enthusiastic? Sorry.
Yes.
I suppose enthusiasm is subjective, but certainly it was my impression that the 18-meter factor and the BR135 and the testing behind it was significant enough to them that it was worthy of emphasis, which I took as a level of enthusiasm, but it was certainly emphasized as the key feature of the product.
And Mr. Jones, I know it's difficult, as you've said, it was some years ago. Can you remember which of Andrew Pack or Philip Heath were enthusiastic in the way that you've described, or was it both?
I'm sorry, I can't recall who said what.
All right. If we can go back to your witness statement, please, and to page 10. At the second paragraph there, you say this: I asked what Kingspan hoped to achieve from the LABC type approval process, given the supporting information they already had in the form of test results and a BBA certificate. The response was that it was very much a marketing aim to have the LABC brand associated with their product. and they wanted the opportunity to further emphasise the suitability of K15 in buildings over 18 metres, again for marketing purposes. Yes?
Yes.
All right. Looking at what you say there in the second line, the supporting information they already had in the form of test results and a BBA certificate. I think you may have answered this, but are you able now to say what test results as supporting information you understood them to have at the time of the meeting? And to be absolutely clear, I'm talking about for the use of the product over 18 metres.
Only the test results that were listed in the BBA certificate and the reference to BR135 that accompanied those results.
All right, we'll come on to those. Did you understand, did you actually look through the BBA certificate and the tests that are listed within it during the course of the meeting?
I'm not sure. I certainly wouldn't have been able in that meeting to properly read and digest the BBA certificate. You know, it was a discussion rather than an opportunity to read.
Yeah.
So I don't suppose I would have read the BBA certificate in detail until I came away from that meeting. But it's possible, I suppose, that they directed me towards specific paragraphs during the meeting. I can't really remember the detail after all this time.
All right. Did you ask during the meeting to see any of the test results or reports that they were referring to?
I didn't at the meeting, no.
Did you at any other time?
No.
Why did you not?
We've talked earlier about the fact that I knew only too well that I didn't have a working knowledge or experience in testing of products, test standards, and that I was basing my summaries on the conclusions within the BBA certificate. Had I asked for the test reports, I suppose the question is, what would I have then been looking to do with those test reports? Because to analyse those test reports would have been a very different exercise to analyse the test conditions, to compare them to the test standards on which they were based, to interpret the results, and if necessary, challenge or ratify the results. That's a process that was way outside of my expertise at the time. So I suppose it begs the question, well, what's the point in asking for the test reports unless I'm going to go through that process, which I know I'm not going to be able to. So, and again, if we link back to the brief given to me by LABC at the very start, where I'm being told, actually, you don't need to dig down and verify the test results because the BBA have already done that for us, and you can take their summaries and conclusions as read.
Yes, I see. So, yes, I think this is right, isn't it? At no stage did you see any test data or test reports for K15 before the May 2009 LABC approval certificate was issued?
No, I didn't.
And is this what you're explaining? Please do correct me if I have this wrong. During the meeting, you didn't, well, during the meeting or at any other time, you did not ask for any evidence at all that the tests had been carried out, because by the time of the meeting, you had already reached a decision that you would not read or analyse those reports, and therefore there was no point in requesting them. Is that what you're saying?
I think that is true. I'd been told during that initial contact with LABC that wasn't part of my brief. I wasn't required to do that because the BBA had already been through that process. They'd already done that.
Yes. Even if you understood that it wasn't a requirement, did you consider at all asking to see the underlying test reports just to have the background and in case you wanted to refer to them when you were carrying out your assessment?
I can't recall whether I considered it, but I didn't feel it appropriate because I suppose if I took the test reports and did not raise a query with them, didn't challenge them, then by implication, I'm accepting their accuracy. But I knew that I wasn't competent to do that, to accept their accuracy. So I think, again, and in my mind, I've been told I didn't need to check the reports. I didn't need to actually check the underlying results. So I had that in my mind, that I was basically doing what had been asked of me.
Yes, I see. That thought process that you've just described, well, hang on, if I take the test reports and don't query them, then I'm effectively accepting them as accurate. Is that a thought process you went through at the time, or is that what you're thinking now? Just so that I'm clear.
I think I would have gone through it at the time. I think, I knew of the testing, so I knew there were test reports out there,
Yes.
and I knew that I could request them. But I'm sure that at that time, I would have been questioning in my mind that if I do request them, what purpose am I requesting them for? Am I going to check them? In which case, am I capable of doing that? Am I going to get them checked by somebody else? But again, that wasn't part of the brief. If it had been, I think the initial conversation with LABC would probably drawn a line under it. We probably wouldn't have gone any further with it. So yes, I probably did consider it at the time.
All right. Did you wonder, and you may not have done, did you wonder why the Kingspan representatives didn't offer any of the underlying test reports to you?
I don't remember thinking it odd at the time, but I can't recall. I'm sorry.
No. Are you able to say if Andrew Pack and Philip Heath had turned up at the meeting with not just the marketing literature and the BBA certificate, but a number of test reports which are cited within the BBA certificate, would you have taken them, or would you have said, actually, thanks very much, but that's outside my remit, I don't want to see those?
I would have taken them if they were part of the package being handed over, but I think I would have taken them on the understanding that checking the reports is not part of the remit of this assessment.
I see. Can we go back to page 20, please, of your first witness statement? And to the first paragraph, please, if I just read that with you. Referring back to part of my answer to questions 9 and 29, I believed from their responses, you're talking there about Mr. Pack and Mr. Heath, to my questions in the initial meeting, that it was very much a marketing aim to have the LABC brand associated with their product. Furthermore, they wanted the opportunity to further emphasize the suitability of K15 in buildings over 18 meters, again for marketing purposes. This latter point seemed to me to be significant to Kingspan, who wanted to capitalize on the testing which had been carried out and the very recent issue of BBA Certificate 084582, which incorporated details of those tests. And again, I appreciate that it is difficult, but are you able to assist us with how or in what way the issue of the suitability for use of K15 over 18 meters seemed to be significant to Kingspan during the meeting?
It was clearly a market that not all insulation products could enter. So there was a clear business advantage to them in having a product that could be marketed in that context.
Forgive me, just stopping you there for a moment. Did they say that, or is that something you already knew?
I don't think I already knew that. No, I don't. Before that meeting, I don't think I knew the significance of the 18-meter issue. I think that was something that was conveyed to me in that meeting.
I see. Thank you. And I'm sorry I stopped you. Actually, go on, please. You were talking about how it came to you to seem to be significant to Kingspan.
Well, yes, it's a particular area of business, an area of sales for them. They had, to my understanding, got the tests in place, but the icing on the cake for them, I suppose, that they've got a BBA certificate now from October of that year that actually ratified what they were doing and how they were marketing the product, and then the LABC endorsement was going to be just another factor in that for them.
Yes. Can you remember exactly what either Mr. Peck or Mr. Heath said to you about the use of the product over 18 metres in terms of compliance with building regulations?
I can't remember the detail, but the key part was BR135 and the way in which this product had performed in fire tests.
Mr. Jones, were you told that more than one fire test relevant to BR135 had been carried out successfully?
I don't believe so, no.
Because you referred just then, I think, to fire tests in the plural. Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, there were other tests referred to in the BBA certificate, so that's why I used the plural.
Yes, I understand. Did you understand, and we are going to come on to it, did you understand any of the tests listed in the BBA certificate which are not BR135 or BS8414? Did you understand any of the others to be relevant to the use of the product over 18 metres?
No, they were background information more than specific.
I see. Were you told in terms during the course of that meeting by either Mr. Heath or Mr. Peck or both that K15 as a product was suitable for use over 18 metres?
I believe I was, yes, and I believe that mirrored the sentence in the BBA certificate which referred to the product having reached the standards for BR135.
And you remember that to be the explanation, do you, that it was suitable for use over 18 metres because it, K15, the product, has met the standards in BR135?
Yes, it was the product that was being talked about because, of course, the system was undefined. So there was emphasis on the characteristics of the product and how those lent to being suitable for use over 18 metres.
Yes, I see. Would you have known going into the meeting, so before it, what testing needs to be carried out to show that a product like K15, let me put that differently. Well, no, would you have known going into the meeting what testing should have been carried out for K15 to be suitable for use over 18 metres?
I think that depends at what stage I properly read the BBA certificate, and I'm not sure, as I've said, whether that was before or after the meeting. But that the description of the tests there made the link between BS8414 and BR135. So that would have been the extent of my knowledge.
Yes, I see. And so it may have been before or just afterwards, but you did come to understand that BS8414 in particular was a relevant test series for the use of this product over 18 metres.
Yes.
All right. How many tests to BS8414 did you understand during the meeting that Kingspan had carried out successfully on any system incorporating K15?
I'm not sure if the number of tests had been discussed, but I think perhaps I would have assumed it was one. It was the one that was described in the BBA certificate.
You think you might have assumed it was one?
Yes, because the BBA certificate talked of a specific test.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Did you ask at any stage during the meeting how many tests to BS8414 had been carried out on systems incorporating K15?
I don't remember, sorry.
No. Do you remember either Andrew Peck or Philip Heath specifically mentioning that only one test to BS8414 had been successfully carried out on a system incorporating K15?
I don't specifically remember that now.
No. Do you remember either of those individuals telling you that K15 was only suitable for use over 18 meters in one specific tested configuration?
No, that was definitely not the case. I mean, I think from very early on in that meeting, one of the first principles that came across was that K15 could be used in different configurations within the parameters of the testing that had been carried out.
Who told you that, Mr. Jones?
I can't recall whether it was Andrew or Philip, but I've said previously that the meeting, to my memory, closely mirrored what was in the Kingspan technical literature, which I know talks of different types of assembly without any caveats to say, you know, this is only, you know, the 18 meter criteria. There was nothing to indicate that only certain criteria fitted that.
Yeah, so that's the content of the edition of the marketing literature, which we're going to come on to look at. In terms of what was actually said to you at the meeting, is it your evidence that whatever particular words were used, you were given to understand that K15 as a product could be used over 18 meters without qualification? Is that what you're saying?
Within the parameters of the testing that had been carried out, which I believe to be reflected in the BBA certificate and the literature. So the impression I was given there is that the tests that had been carried out set parameters in which K15 could be safely used and expected to perform as it had done in the tests. And I think the general principle, as I recall, the impression I came away from that meeting with was that you could use different products as part of the system, as long as the fire performance of those products was equal to or better than the parameters set by the testing.
Yeah.
There was. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I spoke over you. Please do go ahead.
Sorry, I think I finished.
All right. So just going back to that answer, you said, I recall the impression I came away from that meeting was that you could use different products as part of the system, as long as the fire performance of those products was equal to or better than the parameters set by the testing. Yes?
Yes, that was the impression I had.
First of all, I mean, it's very difficult for you to recall, I understand, but is that what was actually said? Did either Mr. Heath or Mr. Pack say that to you?
I believe I had such a strong impression of that coming away from the meeting. My feeling is that they must have done, and that in turn is consistent with what was in the Kingspan literature. So, whilst I'm working from memory of what was said 12 years ago, something gave me that impression in that meeting. I came away thinking that was the case. Yes.
And what were the parameters set by the testing, which you've referred to, as you understood? What were those parameters?
The non-combustible substrate, referred to in the BBA certificate, and a system of cavity barriers, and it was what was described in the BBA certificate to me, and a non-combustible cladding panel.
Yes, I see. Can we go, please, to the transcript? And this is again to the evidence of Andrew Pack, and this is at day 86, page 130. And I want to look starting at line 21, please. Yes, so the question he was asked there is, did either you or Philip Heath, as far as you can recall, tell David Jones that K15 in December 2008, when you met him, was suitable for use over 18 meters only in one specific configuration? And Mr. Pack's response was, I cannot recall the words we actually used, but I would have emphasized that it was based upon a non-combustible substrate and a non-combustible cladding. Sorry, that's actually over onto the next page. Yes. Does that accord with your recollection? Is that what you were told?
I think that's the impression I had. Yes, it mirrored what was being described in the BBA certificate,
Yes.
the non-combustible substrate and a non-combustible cladding board, which was a fairly generic type in that test description.
As far as you can recall, Mr. Jones, did either Philip Heath or Andrew Pack tell you that the only successful test to BS8414 on a system incorporating K15 had been carried out using old technology K15, which by December 2008 was no longer being produced or sold?
No, certainly not, because every part of my judgment thereafter would have been null and void with that information.
Did either Philip Heath or Andrew Pack tell you that the version of K15 then being sold in late 2008 and going into 2009, that the new technology K15 had been incorporated into 4 systems tested to BS8414 Part 2, all of which had been unsuccessful?
No, they didn't.
Would that too have affected the assessment you went on to carry out?
Absolutely, it would have been a different product. Any assumptions made on previous testing would have been irrelevant.
Yes. Did either Philip Heath or Andrew Pack explain to you that the one successful test to BS8414 carried out on a system incorporating K15 was on a masonry-backed system, so to Part 1, and was therefore not relevant to steel frame systems?
No, they didn't. No.
When Mr. Pack was asked about this, if we can go back to his evidence, please, at day 86, page 149. And this is starting at line 15, I think, please. Yes, I've asked in there, did you tell David Jones at that meeting or at any other time that the system tested in May 2005 was a masonry-backed system, not a steel frame system? His answer, yes, it would have been based upon a masonry background, yes. And he was asked again, you told him that? And his answer was yes. However, the literature we had, I believe, showed masonry and steel frame with a non-combustible backing. And I believe it was from that that the LABC was wrote. Do you remember Mr. Pack telling you that? No, I don't. My understanding was clear that it was a non-combustible substrate. That was the test condition. All right. Mr. Jones, did you tell Andrew Pack or Philip Heath at any stage, either during the meeting or at any stage thereafter, about your own levels of expertise and experience as you have described them to us?
I don't suppose I would have been as explicit as that in giving them my background. It wouldn't have been appropriate in that meeting. But I believe that as the meeting progressed, the questions I was asking and the nature of the things I was saying would have been obvious to somebody who worked in this field what my level of experience was.
All right, thank you. Just so that I'm very clear, your level of experience that you say would have been obvious during the meeting due to your questions, are you talking there, well, which of the following 3 things are you talking about? Are you talking about the K15 product, that type of insulation, or use of such products over 18 meters? Or are you talking about your level of experience in terms of the type approval process, or a mixture of those?
I think probably a mixture of them. I mean, the type approval process was new to me, but I had at least had a briefing from LABC on how that worked. So I could talk about the type approval process with some competence. But in terms of my knowledge of K15, of buildings over 18 meters, and of testing and certification generally, I think it would have been apparent, from, as I say, the sort of questions I was asking and the statements I was making, that I wouldn't have been trying to hide, my lack of knowledge. The whole point of this meeting was to elicit this knowledge from Kingspan, to find out from them what I needed to know.
No, I mean, would it be fair for me to say that you would have no reason, would you, to hide your lack of knowledge about K15 or its particular uses?
No, this was supposed to be a relatively collaborative exercise between Herefordshire Council, Kingspan and LABC, all bringing to the table their own particular expertise to come up with a usable document.
Can we go back to your first witness statement again, please, into page 37? If you look, please, it's toward about 2/3 of the way down the page at question 61. You've been asked there, as far as you are aware, did any employee or ex-employee of Kingspan at any stage state that K15 was a material of limited combustibility, whether verbally or in writing? So that's the question, and you're asked to give details. Your answer, if we can read it together, please, is this: if this happened, it would have been in my initial meeting with Kingspan at the start of the Herefordshire Council assessment. However, I cannot from memory recall exact wording or who said what. And so on that basis, it would be wrong of me to say that anybody used the specific phrase limited combustibility. I can say with some certainty, however, that I left that meeting, going over the page, please, to 38. That I left that meeting with the clear impression that this is what K15 was. Yes?
Yes.
Can you recall specifically what it was during that meeting that gave you the impression that K15 was a material of limited combustibility?
I think whilst I can't talk about specific wording, as after all this time, this very clear impression I had, and I believe this was how it's presented it to me, was that K15 has been put in these test conditions, large-scale test rigs, in a situation where only a limited combustibility material would do, and it's passed. It's behaved in those conditions, in these test rigs. It has behaved as you would expect and hope a material of limited combustibility would. That was the impression I had after that meeting. The testing had proved the characteristics of this product when subjected to a fire.
Yes. Were those large-scale test rigs described to you by Andrew Pack and or Philip Heath?
No.
Right. Did either Philip Heath or Andrew Pack tell you in terms that K15 was a material of limited combustibility?
I can't say that they did. I think there's the specific term limited combustibility, which has a meaning in itself, and there are lots of other words that can describe a material that has a limited capacity to burn, and I think perhaps it's difficult sometimes to draw the line between one and the other, or it was for me at that time anyway.
Yes. Did either of them use some words to the effect that K15 had a limited capacity to burn?
I can't remember words, but again, I remember it being the distinct impression that I had. So I believe that somehow in that discussion, words must have been used to give me this very distinct impression that you could subject this product to fire and it would not. I'm not going to say it would not burn, because we know that these products burn, but it would not burn. It would burn in a very limited way.
I see. Did either Philip Heath or Andrew Pack tell you that the test which had been carried out to BS 8414 somehow meant that K15 could be considered to be a product of limited combustibility?
I couldn't say they used those specific words, but I think that was a principle that came out, that it's behaved as you would want a material of limited combustibility to behave in these circumstances. Therefore, it, you know, that, and these were my words later, of course, but it can be considered a material of limited combustibility by virtue of the way it's performed when subjected to fire.
Yes, I see. I understand that those were your words later, and certainly we'll come to those. And I do appreciate that it's your evidence that you can't, in fact, recall specific words. But just going back to that last answer, you said that was a principle that came out, that it's behaved as you would want a material of limited combustibility to behave in these circumstances. Therefore, it, and then you stopped and went on to something else. Is the principle that came out, is this your evidence? The principle that came out, whatever the words that were used, was that because it had behaved like a material of limited combustibility, it could be considered to be one?
Yes, that was how I interpreted what was being said.
I want to take you to the evidence of both Philip Heath and Andrew Pack on this particular issue. If we can take them in turn. If we go to Philip Heath first, please, at day 79, page 178, line 25. Yes, so it's the very final, the last line there. Did you ever tell Mr. Jones during that meeting that K15, and going over please to page 179, was a material of limited combustibility? And his answer, absolutely not. And then the question, did you ever tell him that the test to BS 8414 in 2005 meant that it could be considered to be a material of limited combustibility? Answer, no, I wouldn't have said that, no. Question, did you ever give Mr. Jones the impression that K15 was suitable for use over 18 meters without qualification? Answer, no, I didn't. Mr. Jones, is that evidence true as far as you can recollect?
In terms of them telling me directly that K15 was a material of limited combustibility, as far as the actual wording goes, I think his evidence could be correct, that he didn't say that directly in the way it's worded there. In terms of the question in line 7,
yes,
I think I was given the impression that K15 was suitable for use over 18 meters, perhaps not without qualification, because we still had the parameters set by the testing.
yes.
But the parameters set by the testing were given to be quite broad in terms of non-combustible substrate, non-combustible cladding panel, and the requisite cavity barriers and the like in between.
Yes, and anything non-combustible and some cavity barriers, basically.
That was it, yes, yeah.
Great. Turning to Mr. Pack's evidence on this, please, at day 86 and page 148. And if we go to line 15, can you see that he says there, so these are Mr. Pack's words at A, answer, but I absolutely disagree with the comment that he left that meeting under the understanding that our product was limited combustibility. And then I think I said to him, I'm not sure you can disagree with his recollection that he left the meeting with that impression. I think what you're trying to say is that you didn't give that impression, are you? And he said, absolutely. He was then asked, did either you or Mr. Heath say that K15 was a material of limited combustibility? Answer, I can only comment on myself, and I did not say the product was limited combustibility or infer that it was of limited combustibility. And I asked again, you didn't say it or infer it? And his answer, yes. again, is that right? What do you say about that?
I believe there must have been some form of inference. I came away with that impression of the product, and I must have got that from somewhere.
Yes. Going back, please, to your first witness statement now at page 38. And to the first paragraph, yes. At the top there, do you see the sentence beginning, "I recall thinking"?
Yes.
So this is just after you've explained that you left the meeting with a clear impression that K15 was of limited combustibility. You go on to say there, "I recall thinking that this was consistent with a general opinion among building control surveyors I had known, that Kingspan products would not really burn, but would char slowly and self-extinguish once the ignition source was removed." Yes?
Yes.
Do you mean there, just for clarity, that you recall thinking that after the meeting with Kingspan?
Yes, it's something that stuck in my mind, that I came away from that meeting with the impression that this product had behaved as a material of limited combustibility would be expected to, and then thinking, actually, yes, that's what people have always said about it. I can recall a marketing video, which I believe was from Kingspan of that time, which I'd seen, and I'm sure many of my peers had seen, which showed a piece of Kingspan board being subjected to a blowtorch, and it shows how it doesn't actually catch light, it turns black, it glows red around the edges, the blowtorch is turned off, and the flame peters out. So there was definitely an impression in the industry that was how these products behaved in fire. So what I was being told didn't seem so outlandish with that in mind.
Yes. That general opinion or that awareness that you had of that view of how Kingspan products would perform in fire, am I correct in understanding you were not talking there in your witness statement about K15 only? That was your impression of Kingspan products in general, their insulation boards?
Yeah, this generic form of product, yes.
I see. This memory you had, or this awareness that you had, and the general opinion among building control surveyors that Kingspan products would not really burn, but would char slowly and then self-extinguish once the source of flame was removed. Did you understand that to mean the same as being of limited combustibility?
I don't think I made that direct comparison. I mean, I think what I would say is that now, at this stage, I understand a very great significance attached to the two words, limited combustibility. And I mentioned earlier that actually, is there a difference between a material of limited combustibility and a material which has a limited capacity to burn? They can be two different things. I don't think in 2008 and 2009 I would have quite understood the distinction between those two things.
Yes. Do you see a distinction between them now?
Yes, from the analysis post-Grenfell, yes. I mean, I don't think there can be many industry professionals who don't see the words limited combustibility and hear alarm bells. But I don't believe that was the case in 2008. I don't think it was as well understood.
I see. Could you tell me, when did the words limited combustibility come to mean something different to you than they had done in late 2008, early 2009?
I think the significance of it has been in the last year or so, nearly a year and a half, when I was first asked to start answering questions
By this inquiry?
I mean, bearing in mind that I haven't worked in the building control profession since early in 2014, so I haven't, it hasn't been something that I would have considered since then.
Yes. Thank you. Going back to your witness statement, first witness statement again now, please, and to page 28. If we can look at the second paragraph from the top. No, I don't think that is. Oh, yes, that is it. At the first paragraph there, you say, there is no doubt that my wording in the type approval summary would have been influenced by things that were said by Kingspan representatives at the initial meeting and by things that were written or shown in the Kingspan technical literature. Is that right?
I believe it would be. I believe that first meeting set the scene, if you like. It set the initial principles and in some ways the direction that I took it from there.
Yes. Could we just scroll down that page, please? This is another section that I'm looking for and that is not currently available to my brain. No, we'll come back to that. All right. Can we go now, please, to, I want to show you some email correspondence. If we can go, please, to KIN 30249989, please. Thank you. And if we can go down, please, to the third email down in the chain. So I think it's, yes. So this is your email to Andrew Peck, sent on the 26th of January 2009 at 14:46, yes?
Yes.
You say there, I'm just going to go to the second paragraph, so the larger paragraph. I have now done the research necessary and come up with what I think will be a usable certificate for acceptance by LABC across the UK. What I have tried to do, as we discussed, is to get away from just assessing K15 as a product in isolation and extend the certificate to represent a system approval for the whole external wall arrangement. Of course, with the other components being undefined and with various options available, this does present some problems as we established when we met. What I have done, though, is to refer to the 3 standard details contained within the Kingspan literature, unless you have any other standard detail drawings that you think may be more appropriate. And instead of applying a manufacturer's reference to the undefined elements, I have specified a generic standard for each using British standard references. The conclusion being that K15 can be accepted in all locations, provided the other parts of the wall construction meet the standards stated and reflect the Kingspan standard details. Inevitably, most mainstream products will have been manufactured to the appropriate British standard, and so the system in each case should be fairly easy to pin down, and the contribution of K15 to the relevant parts of the regulations obvious. All right, sorry, it's quite a long passage to read, but just looking at the second line of that paragraph, in the second line about halfway across where you say, what I've tried to do as we discussed. Is this something that you had discussed with Andrew Peck at your meeting in December 2008? And by that, I mean the idea of extending the certificate to represent a system approval for the whole external wall arrangement rather than a product approval for K15?
Yes, I believe this is probably the first contact I had with Andrew since the meeting in December. And I believe it's a sort of continuation of the discussion we had in that meeting about how, you know, and this goes right back to the question I had at the start, is how do I do a system approval when I only have one part of that system? And how that question developed into a discussion in that meeting that eventually led to this email. You know, I think if we go back to the original email chain from LABC, we see we as Herefordshire Council were being asked to do a system approval, not a product approval. And I'd wrangled again and again with how can I do this? But I think that the meeting with Kingspan covered this in quite some detail as to how we can make it a useful certificate, because a certificate just for the product, just for an insulation product, was going to be of no value to Kingspan. It didn't say anything. It just says this is a slab of insulation. So it was clear that they wanted something more. They wanted it to be something that could be representative of a system, albeit that system hadn't been defined. And I think this email is, you know, I've gone away from the meeting and I've racked my brains to see, well, how could we define a system while still staying within the parameters of what's been tested and what this product can be used for.
Yes. In terms of this issue being discussed at the meeting, and you just said there that it was discussed in quite some detail, because I think it's fair to say it was quite an obvious problem with this whole process, was it?
Yes, to me it was a very, as I say, I wrangled over it a lot as to how on earth can I do this?
Yes. Who was it who raised it at the meeting? Was it you, or was it one of Mr. Heath or Mr. Pack?
The problem of I believe it would have been me, because I think it was one of my questions, that I went to that meeting armed with.
I see. And can you remember what either Philip Heath or Andrew Pack said about it? You said a few moments ago, I think, that it was clear that they wanted something that could be representative of a system. Is that what one or both of them said to you?
Yes, that's again, I can't remember the wording, but that was discussed, yes.
All right. Can we go back again, please, to Andrew Pack's evidence? And this is at day, I've got 85, but I think it might be 86, at page 152. Yes. And then if we look at line 19, please. Mr. Pack is being asked there about the email you and I have just looked at, where you said, as we discussed at our meeting, and what you say in the email about system approvals and extending the certificate, all right? And Mr. Pack says, no, it wasn't Kingspan that came up with that idea. We talked to Herefordshire Council about the product. He went away, discussed with LABC, and came back. And his conclusion was that we should treat it as a system approval. And then this was put to him, well, no, but hang on. What he says here is, and Mr. Jones, this is a reference back to the email. If you look at the second line of that larger paragraph, and then, yeah, going over, this quote at the top is from your email that we've just looked at. What I have tried to do, as we discussed, is to get away from just assessing K15 as a product. Mr. Pack says, yes. And then the question is, so that must have been discussed at the meeting. He didn't come away from the meeting, come up with the idea that he would extend the certificate into a system approval and then announce it to you here. He is saying to you here, isn't he? We discussed that idea at the meeting, and here's how I'm going to go about it. Do you see? And then Mr. Pack says, that's what I'm saying. So at the meeting, we discussed just the product in isolation. And I say, yes. Mr. Pack then says, and we're now at line 14, he then went away and said, actually, I've now discussed it and I have another solution, which is to treat it as a system approval. And then if we go down to line 18, please, Mr. Pack says this. So in the meeting we had, we were looking at the product. It was just the product in isolation on its own, just like we did with the tapered insulation. It was talking about the insulation. Obviously, he has now gone away and said, actually, I've now come up with a proposal, and the proposal is that we look at it as a system approval. I realize I've read quite a lot there, but is he right about that? Is that what happened, that you went away afterwards and came up with this idea?
No, I don't agree with that account of events. I can distinctly remember from the meeting that any suggestion that it was just going to be a product approval was of limited value, even to the extent that I feel that if I had said that, I don't think it would have gone any further. Obviously they hadn't at that stage paid LABC any money. But I think if it had just been a certificate of a slab of insulation, it was of no value to them and they wouldn't have gone any further with it. So that email we were looking at a moment ago from me clearly contained some proposals from me about how we might move it forward, but they were proposals designed to meet the needs that Kingspan had expressed in that meeting. It began with their requirements.
Yes. Should we go back to that email? that might assist you. It's KIN 3024989, please. Yes, so at the fourth line down, you say, of course, with the other components being undefined and with various options available, this does present some problems, as we established when we met. Does this, I mean, having been taken to Mr. Pack's evidence, and you've very helpfully said that you don't agree with that account of events, can you help us to, what were the problems you established when you met, as you refer to in the, it's actually the fifth line of that paragraph of that email? What were those?
Well, it was about how to define a system that would stay within the parameters that we needed them to stay within for the testing that had been carried out. If we didn't specify any products as part of that system, then that left it open to use just about anything, which wouldn't have stayed within the parameters of the test. So that was the problem. How do we define these products in a way that limits the system to the parameters needed without actually knowing what those products are?
Yes, and you then go on to set out how you propose to get around the problems that you had discussed, which you've just described. Can I take it that you considered at the time that the proposal you set out there was accurate and correct?
Yes, I believed it to be. I believed that what I was trying to define there was within the parameters of the testing that we'd discussed. Within the parameters of the testing as those had been described to you by Kingspan? Yes, yes. This email is a continuation of the discussion in that meeting. Yes.
I'm sorry, can I just ask for your help on something, Mr. Jones? You were obviously very concerned that you were being asked to produce a certificate for a system when the test had only been, or the appropriate certificate would be for a product. Why did you feel it necessary to go to such lengths to satisfy Kingspan's requirements?
I perhaps ask myself the same question now, but it was because that's what LABC had asked us to do. They'd asked us to do a system approval. They'd asked us to go to meet Kingspan and find out what Kingspan wanted. So I suppose from every angle, I was being pressured by LABC and by Kingspan, if you like, to find a way of doing a system approval. And I suppose I was just trying to please all parties, but at the same time come up with something coherent as far as I felt it was at the time.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Yes, it's true. Sorry.
Thank you. No. Could we go back to your first witness statement, please, and to page 41? Yes. Could you look, please? Do you see the third paragraph, which is quite a big paragraph? If you could go, yeah, that one. If you could go to, it's 4 lines up from the bottom of that paragraph, beginning in terms of merit. Do you see that?
Yes.
I just want to read that with you. You say there, in terms of merit, I believe it would be true to say that information released by a company like Kingspan, a world leader in insulation products with an extensive budget for research and development and a reputation for integrity, would have been viewed not with unconditional acceptance, but with a degree of trust. Now, I think, in fact, you're talking there in particular about the technical or marketing literature that is released by Kingspan. Would it be true to say, or would it be fair to say, that the same thinking would apply on your part to information you were given by Kingspan representatives at a meeting?
Absolutely, yes.
From where had you learned of what you described there as Kingspan's reputation for integrity?
I'd worked in the construction industry all of my career up to that point, not always in building control, of course, but Kingspan are one of the most prominent material manufacturers in the UK, I believe, and so we all knew a lot about the company. Now maybe my impression of them as a company of integrity was misplaced, but it was how I felt at the time. They were an industry leader. They were driving certain parts of the industry agenda, of regulatory agenda. The whole industry turned to them for advice on Part L compliance and installation products at a time, of course, when Part L was at the top of the regulatory agenda. So I think we all knew Kingspan. We all knew of them.
Yes. You said there that the whole industry turned to them for advice on Part L. As far as you were aware at the time, so we're talking again about early 2009, were Kingspan consulted by industry, by other organisations or individuals in industry, or on other aspects other than Part L?
Yes, I believe they would have been. It's the suitability of their products, and of course, in the case of K15, it isn't just the Part L compliance; it's also the Part B compliance and any other relevant, building regulations requirements. So yes, they were providing this advice service to the industry. Yes,
and as far as you were aware, in 2009 or late 2008, and your impression of Kingspan, or your understanding of a reputation for integrity, was that shared by your colleagues, do you think?
Yes, I would say it was.
Yes. All right, Mr. Jones, we're going to move on to talk about your understanding at the time you were carrying out the research to produce the 2009 certificate of certain key terms. So I'm going to ask that we go, please, to your first witness statement at page 29. You've been asked here by the inquiry above about your understanding in May 2009, that's at the top of the page, of a series of different words or phrases, and I just want to take you through those. If we look at A, you've been asked about the meaning of limited combustibility, and you say there, I would have understood limited combustibility in quite a literal sense to mean a material that had the capacity to burn, so could not be considered non-combustible, but would ignite with some difficulty and would not allow flame to spread easily through it. Yes?
Yes.
Where had that understanding come from?
I think it was just perhaps a literal interpretation of the words limited combustibility, and perhaps links to an earlier question where I said it is about making this distinction between limited combustibility and materials that have a limited capacity to burn, which I think at that time I don't believe I had, and I don't believe I was unusual in that. But so I think it is quite a literal interpretation, and I don't think there was a wide understanding of what limited combustibility was in the industry then, in my experience.
So is your understanding of the meaning of that phrase, limited combustibility, different now?
Yes. I mean, I was aware in 2008 that there was a table in the back of approved document B that gave a criteria for limited combustibility. So I knew that much, but I still would have viewed it as, well, there may be other ways of defining a material that has a limited capacity to burn, as it was always drummed into us as building control officers that the approved document is one way of achieving something, but you should always be open to looking at other evidence to see if the functional requirement is met. So the functional requirement in my mind for limited combustibility would be something that had this limited capacity to burn.
Yes, I see. So you were aware at the time that there was a table defining the term within approved document B, were you?
Yes, it would have been that table was referred to in section 12. So I would have been aware of that. Yes.
Yes. But is this right? You decided that there might be other ways to view it, or of defining a material as having a limited capacity to burn.
Yes, about looking at a functional requirement. And then, as I say, this was something that really was drummed into us as building control surveyors, that we all knew that the approved documents could be very limited in terms of, well, they could be very confusing, they could be open to interpretation, they were always behind the times in terms of industry development. So it was a requirement of the job that you be prepared to look at and properly consider alternative approaches that seem to meet the same functional requirement.
Yes, I think I understand all that. Just so that I'm clear, would you not, you say that you were aware of the table in approved document B defining limited combustibility and giving that phrase its particular meaning in this context. Before deciding on the basis of all the things about the approved documents which you've just mentioned, before deciding that it would be good to look at alternatives and other ways to define it, would it not be sensible to actually check the definition in that table in approved document B to see whether you needed to go outside of it in any way?
I believe I would have done that.
I see.
In that it was referred to in section 7, which is where I would have started.
I see. All right, we'll come to that then. Thank you. If we can go back to your witness statement, which I think is still on, should still be on the screen, and look at B. This is about the meaning of national class naught, a classification to national class naught. And you say there, let me go down the page a little, please. Or maybe onto the next page, I don't know. Yes, thank you. You say there, actually, if we look at B and onwards together, you say first, I would have understood class naught to be the highest possible national standard when judging the ability of a material to prevent fire from spreading across it. And then you say at C, I would not have had a particular understanding as to how class naught was achieved, but would have known that there were tests which could demonstrate whether a material achieved class naught. Yes?
Yes.
You then go on to say, I would have been aware that those properties which allowed some materials to be designated as class naught could be the same properties which allowed them to be classed as materials of limited combustibility, and vice versa. However, I would have known that a material of I would have known that a material being designated class naught would not have automatically allowed it to be considered limited combustibility, even though that might often be the case. Yes?
Yes.
And then at the last paragraph, you say, I can recall a great deal of confusion over this, both in the wider construction industry and within the building control profession. I would say from my experience then that it was common to hear people say, even within building control circles, that if a material doesn't allow fire to spread across it, then it must be of limited combustibility. Yes?
Yes.
Given that you've identified that, well, let me just check actually, were you aware at the time of that confusion you describe in industry?
Yes, I was aware of the confusion. It was something as building control officers we often had to correct in the wider industry, the difference between fire resistance and fire retardance and combustibility. It wasn't widely understood.
No, but those were matters which you as a building control professional had to have a good enough working knowledge of to be able to correct the misunderstandings of others. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Can I take it then that in 2009, there was absolutely no confusion in your mind as to the difference between and the relationship between a classification to national class naught and a material of limited combustibility?
Yes, I knew that it was two separate things, that the class naught designation of K15 was a piece of background information that viewed alongside everything else might have pushed you towards a certain conclusion, but I knew that in itself didn't allow a material to be called limited combustibility. I mean, I think the only, and this is all from memory of how I thought at the time, I think the only possible confusion would be that I think there was sometimes an understanding that if you have a material that is a class naught, that the material making up the surface layer of that material would be of limited combustibility, because if it wasn't, fire would spread readily across it. So a Class O product might have a limited combustibility surface, but what lies behind it is not. And I suppose the question comes then, what if you've got a product that is a solid block of something like a slab of insulation? If you make the judgment that the surface of it has achieved Class O, so the surface layer must be of limited combustibility, but actually the middle of it is made of the same material, could that be limited combustibility? Again, I don't think I would have, that in itself wouldn't have been enough for me to say, oh, this product's limited combustibility. There were other factors, but it was just another piece of evidence, when I'm weighing up the facts to make a judgment.
Yes, all right. Thank you. If we can go back to page 29 of your witness statement, please. No, I'm so sorry, to page 30, in fact, and to paragraph E, which I think is about halfway down. Yes. There you had been asked about the relevance, if any, of a Class 0 classification to an insulation board such as K15. And you say, the only direct relevance I would see is in relation to cavity barriers in table 13 of approved document B, where the extent of subdivision is linked to surface spread rating of surfaces within the cavity. Yes? Do you see that? Mr. Jones, I appear to have lost your sound.
Sorry, am I back now? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now. I'm so sorry. Could you repeat your last couple of sentences? I think you were speaking, but I couldn't hear you.
Sorry. Yes, I was just agreeing that, yes, I can see that.
Yes, all right. Thank you. Is that something you were aware of in 2009 or something you've become aware of at some stage since then?
No, I think that was something I was aware of in 2009 because, once again, it's something that's referred to in section 12.
Yes. All right, let's go to page 31, please, and to paragraph F. Here you're being asked about your understanding as at May 2009 of the 8414 test series. And you say, I would not have had any real knowledge of the BS 8414 test series other than the fact that it set the standard for testing external cladding systems and had links with BR 135. It had never come up in anything I had dealt with up to that point. Yes?
Yes.
Did you appreciate, prior to the issue of the LABC approval certificate in May 2009, that BS 8414 is a system test rather than a product test?
I wouldn't have had a detailed understanding of that test series, no.
But, well, fair enough, I appreciate that, but did you know that? Did you
Yes,
know that it was a system test?
Yes, sorry, I think, yes, I knew by virtue of its links with BR 135 that it was a test of the system, yes. Yes, I think what I meant to say was I wouldn't have appreciated the very specific nature of the test, as in a BS 8414 test is only valid for an exact replica of the test that it's based on.
You did not appreciate that at the time?
Not at the time, no.
When did you come to appreciate that?
Only in preparing for the responses to the inquiry in the last.
All right. And then we perhaps don't need to go back to it, but no, we probably do. Back to page 31, please, and to paragraph H. You say there in the first line, I would not in 2009 have appreciated the difference between parts 1 and 2 of BS 8414. Is that right?
That's right.
Was that the case both before and after your meeting with Kingspan in December 2008?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Do you remember whether at any stage of your meeting with Philip Heath and Andrew Peck, the difference between part 1 and part 2 of BS 8414 was touched on?
I don't believe it was, because I think it would have prompted me to research it further.
Yes. Did you at any stage read BS 8414, either part 1 or part 2, before the approval certificate for K15 was issued?
No, I didn't.
Given that BS 8414, well, I think you said that neither BS 8414 nor BR 135 had come up in anything you had dealt with up to that point, and you were aware that BR 135, as you put it, I think, set the standard for external cladding systems. Were you not prompted by this piece of work and what it encompassed to look up BS 8414 or BR 135?
I wasn't at the time. No, I believe I thought that the sort of fairly definitive statements in the BBA certificate were enough to say this product has met the classification necessary for BR 135, and that was the information I went forward with.
Yes, without even knowing what the classification criteria in BR 135 were.
Yes, having had no experience with those British standards, it just wasn't. I think when using third-party guidance, in particular British standards, I was always taught that you've got to be careful not to pick and choose. If you're going to use a British standard, you either use it fully or you don't use it at all. You can't just use bits of it and pick and choose the bits you understand. So I think perhaps I felt that not having any knowledge of 8414 or testing standards in general, that I wasn't going to learn about these test series in the scope of this exercise that I was doing.
I see. Are you saying essentially that it was better to proceed with no knowledge at all than to start trying to learn about it at that stage? It was
just beyond the scope of what I'd been asked to do by LABC, I think is the key to it. If as I described earlier, if my brief had been to properly analyse and vet the test results that were based on BS 8414, then I would have naturally needed to have a proper understanding of 8414 in order to do that, to see if the test conditions matched what was required by the standard. But because all of this was outside of the scope of the brief, it wasn't part of what I was asked to do.
Yes. Mr. Jones, are you able to say if in your call with the LABC, that person had said to you, right, you're going to need to understand BS 8414 parts 1 and 2, the criteria in BR 135, and the circumstances in which Kingspan's particular test was carried out, do you think you would have accepted this piece of work?
No, I think that would have, had we taken on that piece of work as Herefordshire Council, we would have had to have outsourced that to a fire specialist, because we didn't have that expertise within the department. And quite honestly, if that were the case, we would have said to LABC, look, just go straight to a fire consultant. There's no point in coming to us in between. You might as well go straight to a consultant.
Yes. Were you familiar, you've referred to it, I think now a couple of times. Did you look in the course of your review or looking at the documents in order to write up your type approval summary? Did you go to approved document B?
Yes, I did.
To what section, can you remember? We'll come on to look at it if that will help, but
I think it's section 12, the part that deals with external.
Right. Moving now on in time, after your meeting with Kingspan, can you tell us what work you did at that stage? What research, if any, did you carry out after the meeting?
After the meeting, I think I would have gone away, read in detail the BBA certificate and the Kingspan literature, referred to the notes I'd taken in the meeting with Kingspan, and I would have related that back to approved document B. Well, and some of the other approved documents that are referred to in that report, but mainly approved document B.
Yes. Did you consider it open to you, following your meeting with Kingspan, to request more documents from them if you had wanted to do so?
Yes, I wouldn't have proceeded if I felt there were documents I needed that I didn't have.
No, you would have requested those.
Yes.
But you felt, am I right, at the time that what you had was enough?
I felt that what I had was enough for the scope of the exercise that LABC had delegated to us.
Yes. If we can go please to page 22 of your first witness statement. And to the first paragraph there, you summarise essentially what you did after the meeting with Kingspan. You say, to the best of my recollection, actually I think you're summarising the process in general. To the best of my recollection, it began with me attending an initial meeting with Kingspan technical representatives at their offices, followed by a review of the technical literature provided for the product and the BBA certification for the product, alongside the functional requirements of Part B of the building regulations and the guidance in approved document B. Yes?
Yes.
When you describe there alongside the functional requirements of Part B and approved document B, do you mean, in very practical terms, do you mean that you had approved document B open in front of you while you were drafting this summary?
When I say alongside, I'm not meaning physically alongside, but looking at the documents in tandem, looking at them and relating them to one another.
Yes. All right. And if we go on to the second paragraph there, you say that your findings were drawn together in the form of a typed summary. And then you say that initially that was for the purpose of an internal review. Yes?
Yes, that would have been the first stage.
And you go on, the internal review was held at one of the regular team meetings we used to hold, monthly I recall, involving myself, the building control manager, and the other 4 senior building control surveyors. There are no written records of these meetings. For the most part, these meetings were focused on technical matters and attempted through discussion to gain a common approach to matters which were open to different ways of interpretation. The review would not have been particularly in depth and would have involved informal discussion about the key features of the product review. Yes?
Yes.
Did you explain to any of the colleagues at that meeting that you had formed a judgment that K15 was a material of limited combustibility? Can you remember?
I can't remember, but I think as one of the key features in the report, it would have been mentioned. Yes.
Yeah. What was their reaction? Can you recall?
I can't recall exactly what the reactions were, but there was no challenge. Nobody said, "Wait, hang on."
No strong disagreement. Right. At that stage, did you take any kind of other informal advice about any aspect of your assessment of K15?
No, I didn't.
Can we go now, please, to page 27 of your first witness statement? If we look at the final paragraph on that page, you say, I did not see the need to seek further advice beyond this, in the knowledge that the work I was doing would ultimately be checked and verified by LABC. I cannot answer for any LABC employees in respect of this question, but if they did, then I was not told. Yes?
Yes.
I think we may come back to the question of what checks you understood would be carried out by the LABC following your assessment. But for now, do you mean that the only reason you took no further advice on your assessment was because you were aware that there was some system of checks to be carried out by the LABC?
I think that was very significant, yes, to me, that the knowledge that it was going to go through a further level of checking gave me more, well, in the first instance, it gave me more confidence to have a go at it, at a time when I was doubting my ability to do it right back at the start. But also at this stage, knowing that others would be looking at it and vetting at it through the LABC network, I think that gave it a sort of robustness to me that I felt, okay, I can put this in as it is and see what comments come back.
I see. So it was a source of, is it fair for me to say that it was a source of comfort to you that would be taking place?
Yes, comfort would be the right word, yes.
All right. When you described then the issues you had around your confidence as to whether or not you could carry out this assessment right at the beginning before you spoke with the LABC, are you telling us that once you'd spoken with the LABC, you had no further concerns about your ability to carry this out?
I still saw it as something quite challenging because it was very new to me, and there's no question about that. I wasn't suddenly confident to do something new, but I think that the nature of that discussion and the very limited scope that they were asking made me think that, well, actually, perhaps in terms of that scope, perhaps I can do this, and in any case, somebody else will be checking it afterwards. So between us, between Kingspan, Herefordshire Council and LABC, whoever they use for the checking,
yes,
we should be able to come up with something meaningful.
As a collaboration, essentially, which is what I think you described it as earlier.
Yes, that's exactly right.
All right. Mr. Jones, again, I'm going to just pause for a moment there in order to ask the chairman whether this might, looking at the time, be an appropriate time to stop for lunch. I realise, again, a little bit early, but it's a good time in terms of how we're running.
All right. And it's obviously convenient from your point of view in terms of questions.
It is.
All right. Well, it's very nearly 1 o'clock, Mr. Jones. I think we can stop there to have some lunch. We'll resume at 2 o'clock, please. And please don't talk to anyone over the break, either about your evidence or anything relating to it. All right?
Right.
We'll see you at 2 o'clock then. Thank you very much.